Hi, folks. This week we're going to talk about government information and why it's so important in information literacy. So, what exactly is government information? It's really anything that is published by the federal, state, or local government. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be like airplane manuals or, World War II era, you know, uh, Army issued uniform standards. It's literally anything that is published by the federal government. So this could even include a pamphlet. It could include a poster. It could include a website. And um, so a lot of times when we hear government document, we think boring and, you know, big, thick congressional committee transcripts. And although those are the case and those can be a bit dry and not the most interesting things in the world, the government actually publishes some beautiful um, coffee table books with, especially from NASA, when they publish information from their telescopes, or the space station, or images from Mars. So a lot of times a government information or a government document isn't even you may not even think that it's a government document because it looks like a regular book that you would buy at a bookstore. Really the three main places that you'd find, and by places I mean central um, locations where these are really housed, are the government publishing office, the National Archives, and libraries. Libraries are included in this because uh, decades ago, the federal government saw a need to be able to to disseminate information to a broad, um, range of demographics. And libraries were always viewed as the one place that reaches really any kind of community, urban, rural, suburban, and they're open to everybody. So, up until recently, um, anything that the government published would get mailed out to a federal depository library. Now, not all libraries were federal depository libraries, but there would be designated libraries so that people could go to them free of charge to obtain this information and read it. And the idea behind it, too, is to have a transparent government and to make government information as transparent as possible. Now, I know, and this is why I tie government information around when we do conspiracy theories. Um, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's why libraries are included in this. Um, CSU is a federal depository library, but we are a subset from the regional library, which is the University of Georgia. They literally get everything published by the government publishing office, and if we are going to weed something out because we feel that it's obsolete, we don't need it anymore, we can't house everything that we've ever bought since the beginning of the college, we wouldn't have the space to do that. So we let UGA know what we have, and it's this big, complicated process. And they often will say, hey, we don't have that, give it to us. And the reason for that is so they have almost a complete record. Should anything get destroyed, whether it's at the government publishing office itself or one of its regional libraries, um, one library has the record of it. So it's kind of like a safety net for government documents. Um, Recently, as of last year, CSU went completely digital. We still have a lot of the print records, and where we focus and have a lot of great primary source information published by the government is our military records for World War One, World War Two. So if you're a history major or political science, there's some really great historical um, records that we have that can be very helpful in assignments. The National Archives is another, you might have heard quite a bit of it in the news recently. The National Archives is the country's archive. It stores all of its records from the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, to our nation's most top secret classified information. It houses the everything. The if a leader writes a letter to the president, it goes to the National Archives for record keeping. And basically, it's just one giant library of documents. Now, like I said, it houses the classified and very top secret records, which has been in the news lately. And they have a whole that's not public information. But basically, if it's not classified or a judge hasn't sealed the information for a reason, almost all of this is public information. So the National Archives is a very good research resource if you're looking for primary sources or um, government related topics. It's a really great resource for those types of things. And the Government Publishing Office is exactly what it is. It sounds like it publishes all of the um, information that the government wants to issue. So the CDC, when COVID broke out, the CDC wants things published, be able to distribute. Government Publishing Office publishes out. So the CDC obviously creates the data, but it's the publishing office that publishes it. So that's another great database of if you're looking for congressional records or transcripts, those sorts of things. It's a massive database and a little tricky to search. We'll go over that next week. But so in this unit, government information is a massive topic. Um, each little topic I'll cover in this video could be its own week, and government information could literally be its own class. Um, this week, I'm going to touch on a few different elements of government information that is most likely to come across your daily lives. And some of the topics are civics, which is elections, how government functions and runs, how to find state and local laws, freedom of information from government agencies, and civil rights, and why how this applies to them. So going back to why I tie this into around the same time we look at conspiracy theories, is that governments all over the world have done, including ours, have done terrible things in the past. So how can we trust anything that they publish? And keep an open mind through this lesson if this is a concern of yours. And throughout it, I'll address this issue throughout the video. But keep an open mind and remember what we learned with conspiracy theories. Um, we have to look at it in a lens of asking ourselves, can we trust this? And why shouldn't we trust this? And one of the main reasons is that from the beginning of our country, there were some very, very fundamental principles that the founding fathers wanted to incorporate into um, how this country would grow, and they labeled in the Constitution and other letters that they correspondences that they sent to one another, what was really important to have a functioning, well-run government. Freedom of the press, if you look in a lot of historical documents, especially within Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, freedom of the press is essential. And that's why it's our number one, our First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. You can't have any kind of democracy, or like in ours, a representative um, democracy, without a free press, and without there being consequences such as jailing those critical of the government, whoever's in office in time. um, it was also important that all information is published and made publicly available, so not hiding it. Very few countries, if any, allow as much government information published as we do. And not even that, there's classification laws. So even if a document's classified, um, after a certain amount of time, and it depends on what the document is, um, and really that it's not one person that can say that's classified forever. It goes through a whole process. Usually, if it's really sensitive, 50 years, and it must be unclassified. Sometimes there's court cases where the government says, hey, this is really sensitive, people are still alive, and they have to really, they can't just say, no, this can't be declassified. Sometimes it's unclassified or declassified, with redacted portions for privacy, or maybe certain topics are mentioned within a classified document that are still classified, so they have to redact it. So, but really, no other country makes as much information about the government public. There's also whistleblower laws and protections, and recently these have gotten criticized quite a bit, because if somebody is making a claim that somebody in government is um, acting inappropriately, or there's corruption going on, why do they get to keep their identity hidden? Well, nobody's going to point out corruption if there isn't some protection for them, because it could be the end of their career, and that's not fair. They're trying to do the right thing. Um, and also there can be, depending on what they're trying to uncover, to say, hey, there is a problem here, their lives could be in danger. So that's why whistleblower laws and protection exist, so that people are incentivized to stand up and do the right thing, and bring attention to corruption and illegal activity. So that's one reason why you can put a little more faith in a lot of the government information process, is because our government is so massive, and there's so many people that work in it, that to hide something, it's very difficult. It would take a lot of incentive, whether it's money or intimidation, to keep something really under wraps. And so often, where there's been lots of times in history where things get out because somebody takes a stand and wants to do the right thing. So, like Watergate, oh gosh, that was probably 50 years ago ish. Um, and, you know, somebody stood up to do the right thing and say, hey, the president is corrupt and is doing these corrupt things. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but for the sake of time, without whistleblower protections, and that person identity wasn't revealed till fairly recently. So, um, yes, it's possible that there could be corruption in the information, but there's a lot of protections and safeguards into why you can trust it, because there is that ability for somebody to speak up and say something. There's also a lot of transparency laws, like Freedom of Information Act, which we'll go over in a little bit. There's a lot of paper trails. Um, the government entities, state, local, federal, um, there's a lot of paper that, and I don't necessarily mean literally paper, but there's always a connection. So if there is corruption, and because we have a free press, it's it's not impossible for a journalist to start seeing something that there might be something going on that's wrong, that's of public interest, and follow the trail. Because there's so much bureaucracy, it's like a kind of like breadcrumbs are left behind to help people find information and piggyback off of that information. And then the courts. A lot of government, how the government obtains information, must go through the courts. Certain warrants, if somebody's secretly being monitored, you can't just do that. Especially, very powerful public figures. They are to get that's a very specialized warrant that going to some of the highest top courts to get a secret phone tapping warrant. So there's a lot of protections, and that from the beginning, the founding fathers wanted, and that tradition has kind of stayed. Now, obviously, they didn't have cell phone warrants and that kind of thing, but the idea of the courts and different checks and balances being there to protect the integrity of government, meaning that they're accountable to the public, is another reason why you can put a little more faith than maybe you thought you could into some of the information. So why dedicate a whole week to government information? And going back to the founding fathers, it is very important that you know about these things, of where to find these. And Thomas Jefferson said, "I agree with you that it is the duty of every good citizen to use all the opportunities which occur to him for preserving documents relating to history of our country." So government information is also not just historical, learning about events, but the context of the events. You can get a lot of um, reading in between the lines from how life was back in that time, um, and often that's important when you're studying history, or trying to understand why there's a tradition of something. It also helps you be a responsible citizen. And the most famous um, government document is the Constitution. And of course, that's obvious. But it often answers questions of why things work the way they do. Why is government structured the way it is? Why are the courts the way they are? Why do we do the census? It's all in the Constitution. Um, and there's a theme within the Constitution that a lot of this information must be made public. And if you click on this link, I won't go over that right now, but it'll take you to the National Archives, where they house the um, original copy, and it has a lot of great sources of information, not just about Constitution, they have a whole section called our founding documents. And it gives you a lot of insight should you ever, need to write about the Constitution or just out of your own curiosity. Okay, FOIA. You might have heard this term, Freedom of Information Act. And it basically means that anything published by the government is public information, unless it's classified or sealed by a federal judge. So if you want to know something about a particular agency, federal agency, you submit a FOIA request. Um, Often you can just go to the agency's website. Let's say you wanted to know something from the Department of Labor. Just Google the Department of Labor, and there'll usually be a very easy to find link. Submit a FOIA request, and they are required to let you know in 30 days. Now, often you may have heard that something will take like 500 years to process. Well, when somebody requests all the information about a topic from 1970 to 2000, that's a lot of time, and it may include like tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of pages of documents. Now, when they're processing your FOIA request, they have to make sure that private information isn't released about people, like social security numbers. So there's somebody who has to go through every single page that they send and redact information that might still be classified or related to a classified topic. So that when you hear that, oh, the archive says it'll take 900 years to process, I think that was the case for somebody wanted to know everything about the Russia investigation that started in 2016, about the Trump campaign. It would take 900 years to process. There was hundreds and thousands of pages of documents, and some of it is very classified. Um, so, but if you're asking for a reasonable amount of data, by law, the government agency is required to provide it to you in a timely manner, and they're required to respond to you within 30 days of receipt of your request. And this is a short video on FOIA. It's just a minute long, so let's watch this, and I'll see you on the
Freedom of Information Act, which is commonly known as the FOIA, is a law that gives you the right to access information from the federal government. It's often described as a law that keeps citizens in the know about what their government is doing. Under the FOIA, agencies must release any information that is requested unless that information is protected from disclosure by law. The FOIA also requires that agencies automatically disclose certain information, including frequently requested records. As Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court have all recognized, the FOIA is a vital part of our democracy.
So, as an example, I'm going to use voting in elections for several reasons. As an example of good citizenship, and also as an example of locating government information. And in recent years, I'm sure you've all have heard at some point, elections have come into question. And me as a government information librarian, it's been frustrating because a lot of these concerns and conspiracy theories about elections all could be answered with just a quick Google search and looking at a Secretary of State website. And know that's, some elements of elections have come into question, and a lot of people thought it was a new thing, but like mail-in voting, but mail-in absentee voting has been around for decades, as long as I've been alive. My grandmother, who's 95, remembers mail-in voting when she was younger. So it isn't a new thing, and the concern over its security, um, for example, in Georgia, if you did mail-in balloting, it's extremely easy to see how they're processed, why it's secure, how it's secure, and how you can even see for yourself where your ballot in the process of voting is if you mail it in. So, also, I wanted to go over elections because civics and news literacy, again, in recent years, has come into question. And there is so much misinformation about civics that are out there that it's really caused some deep divides in our country. Um, and so, for elections, if you are hearing something, um, or you're concerned about something that might affect your desire to vote, or um, you know decide to take action on, it helps you make better decisions. So USA.gov, vote.gov, and the National Associations of Secretaries of State are three websites that you can go to that are excellent in explaining election processes for um, federal laws. It'll guide you to the different states and their laws, because every state has a different um, election process. There's a lot of similarities between states. General concepts are the same, but there's a reason why one state takes longer to count than the other. Um, and all of this information you can find easily on one of these three sites. So, what is civics? It's just the study of government and citizen participation. And voting is one of the biggest ways you can participate in government. So, um, being literate, news literate in civics is important because it keeps you well informed. It gives you skills needed to recognize false information, and it empowers us to find trustworthy information sources, so we can all participate and democratize the elections process. And a lot of people took law into their own hands when they thought their rights for voting and election integrity, and they're paying consequences for it. So, you know, it's important to keep into perspective what we talked about last week: conspiracy theories versus real conspiracies, um, and logically piecing information together. And if you click on the graphics while you're watching, on the actual slides, I don't think it'll let you do this through the screen recording, but you click on the graphics in the actual Google slide presentation, and it will take you to the various websites. And to go over basic election procedure, this is true of most states. You have a Secretary of State and or elections commissions that are elected people, and they run the elections from the administrative side. They establish the protocol. They are in charge of ballot data, and securing it, auditing it. Um, they're in charge of providing the resources, so the local precincts where people will actually cast their ballot, keeping them secure. They figure out which machines are the most secure to use for the time. Um, and they're basically the governing body over elections. Then you go a step down, and typically there'll be a county elections board. So there is a Muskogee County elections board. Um, Sometimes it goes into the city, depending on how big the county is. And at that step, that's where, after you cast your ballot, um, data is taken to, and election data is never transmitted like over Wi-Fi. There's somebody who there's a whole chain of custody, and that means that someone, when all the ballots are cast for the day, somebody takes the electronic data out of the machine, secures it, takes the paper ballots that were scanned and submitted. And the reason why that there you electronically vote and then there's a paper ballot is it's a backup system. So let's say that the electronic data gets corrupted. There's a paper ballot that marks your vote, um, or and it keeps the integrity of the count too. So if you have more votes than ballots, there's a problem somewhere, and it helps you isolate problems. So it just creates another system of if something happens to one means, whether it's electronic or paper, there's electronic or paper to verify the data. Um, Local precincts will take the ballots to the county elections um, office. And I'm using very, very broad general terms because this process alone could be like 3 weeks of how it works. But, and there's a very strict chain of custody. So, um, and throughout the whole process, there's poll watchers watching these workers from both parties or three parties if there's a third party candidate, and they're there to verify that there's nothing shady going on in the counting or transportation process. When election counters, ballot counters go home for the night, there's somebody, poll watchers, um, there all night long watching the ballot so that nobody does anything to it. If you really need something to help you fall asleep, in Georgia, you can watch a live stream of the election counting process in Atlanta. They have like 4 or 5 different camera angles too. So I'm sure there's lots of states that do that. So that's just one example of making a government process and the information transparent. So I'm telling you all this, but how do you really know that? Like, where do you look to know that this is all okay? So, like I said, the Secretary of State's office, Brad Raffensperger is our Secretary of State. Um, that is a wealth of information. If you want to really put yourself to sleep, they have everything on that site, the types of machines used, user manuals for those machines, in the respect of how they work, you know, how they, you know, how they scan, the type of optical scanners, um, what, how is, if a bubble is filled out by hand, what counts as a true ballot, like a true count. Um, so, I mean, it's just when I first looked at the Secretary of State's website, I was just floored about how much detailed information you can find. You can even find the information of the contracting bids for companies that provide the election machines. There's several companies throughout the United States and around the world that handle elections capabilities through and with different means. Every country is different, obviously, so they have a lot of different options in um, ballot machines. So, but if you really wanted to know about them, especially after there was a lot of accusations about the ballot counters in the 2020 election, go to the Secretary of State's website. The Federal Elections Commission, they really set stage for federal elections. Um, you can learn a lot of the processes, a lot of federal law, and why certain things are done the way they are. You can also report voter fraud there if you suspect there's voter fraud. Um, and they have just very detailed information that you could ever want to know of um, why certain things happened when they did. In the 2020 election, there was a lot of um, questioning of why so many states had new machines. Well, if you went to the Federal Election Commission, you'd find out that there was a study done by the Department of Homeland Security saying, "Hey, most states have very obsolete, outdated machines, and some of them might have the capability to transmit through Wi-Fi. We got to make these secure because CIA is getting rumors that some countries are trying to do nefarious things, and um, that Congress provided even funding to help states upgrade their machines and to protect their integrity. So, if you ever have a question of um, federal elections, the Elections Commission is a great place to look. Um, the Election Assistance Commission is also a great source of information. It can guide you to where to look for state election codes, or give you brief narratives of state election processes, um, who the secretaries of state are. um, and it also helps state and local governments with their election process, and um, on a government level, government to government, it helps them with the process, and gives information on how to handle poll watchers, and um, you know that volunteer to do it, and from the political parties. So this link right here is a research guide I created on elections. It follows in-depth information from the 2020 and 2016 elections, and has different guides on researching elections if you need to. So I encourage you to go check that link out. So Georgia elections. I provided the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is responsible for several um, major elements, such as businesses and business licensing. So this links directly to their elections section, and then the Georgia Code laws. This link, it has kind of like a tutorial with it, provided by the Secretary of State's office, showing you exactly where to find election code, and because election law, or law in general, reading the actual state codes are, there it can be a little challenging. It's not always that intuitive, so it shows you exactly where different provisions or rules or laws are within the elections code. So I posted also election law. Um, the Secretary of State's website has a wealth of election results and the election data behind it. So you can literally sit there and download. And I've done a study of like an in-depth study of the 2020 election. So you can download all of the data from how different counties voted by demographic, and it's massive amounts of data that you can really locate. And we're actually going to go over that a little bit more, because election data, there's some very surprising things that you might want to know about, because most people don't realize it. Okay, so what what's the point? And why does this matter? Um, and you may not be convinced on why knowing where election information for Georgia or any state is important. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and you might already know this, but a lot of people don't. So don't feel bad if you. I didn't know this till fairly recently myself. Um, is voter information public? Yes, but your voting information is public. Um, People can find out your address, your the years you voted. Now they can't find out how you voted, just if you voted or if you're registered to vote. Um, and a lot of people don't know that information is public. There are ways to make it not public, like if you are a victim of domestic violence, and you have a restraining order and you don't want somebody to find you. There's a process, but your information can be suppressed, so um, nobody can find it. Did you also know that someone can challenge your right to vote in every state, and every state has a different process for it? Um, Voter rolls are published, and it says who's registered to vote. It says if they've voted before in prior elections, not how you voted, just if you voted. Um, and they can say, Allison Cook, I don't think she's legally allowed to vote. And there's a court process, and sometimes people don't even know that they've been their their right to vote has been challenged till they try to go vote. So it's always very important to update your address as much as you can, and that's usually the most common way somebody will try to challenge somebody's right to vote, is addresses don't match anymore. Um, and it's important before an election, before the registration period is over, to check your registration, especially if you hadn't voted in quite some time. Um, so I know it sounds like who would do this? You would be surprised how many people have the free time to do that. And I couldn't find the news clip that I saw several years ago, but there was somebody he's retired and he actively does this to try to weed out voter fraud, and he regularly challenges people's right to vote. So um, that's one reason why it matters. Being aware of your basic voting laws and what is and isn't allowed, that's why it's important. And the whole point of this class is learning about fake news and misinformation and disinformation. Um, you can click on this. I won't do it right now because it will move away from the screen recording, but um, the link to this, so it's enlarged. There's other links within it you can see right there. Um, you can find more information if you're interested. But I blew up two of the discussion points from the infographic, um, just because they've been very in the news lately. And often, especially if you're not following politics like someone like me does, you may not even know what they're talking about. So, ballot mules, um, and it's somebody who is basically stuffing ballot drop boxes to skew the election. And there's tons of reasons why that's not really possible. But it basically, you have to request an absentee ballot first of all. You only get one ballot per person. And if, like, let's say you didn't get it, you kind of have to sign this really serious affidavit saying, I know under penalty of Georgia code, blah, 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 that, if I'm lying, I'm going to jail. Um, And when you fill it out and mail it back, each step of the process, it gets scanned. So post office picks up the ballot, scans it. That goes into a database that you can actually track yourself too on your Georgia My Voter page. Then the ballot place gets it. They scan it. They open the first envelope, scanned. Second envelope, scanned. Um, Actual ballot scanned. Um, so, and then when it's cast, it's scanned, and you can see it says something like ballot cast. So if I tried to stuff ballots, a ballot box, we don't have designated ballot boxes in Georgia, but if you know, in the through the post office, if I tried to put more than one ballot for Allison Cook, they'd see it right away. For me to obtain a ballot, I have to be registered and I have to show proof of that I am who I am. So is it possible? Sure, I suppose anything's possible, but not it for somebody to vote more than once. It's very difficult to do, and you couldn't do it for millions of votes. That just it's not possible. It's just not possible. Um, and mail-in ballot rumors, I already discussed a little bit, but they're very safe. There's a whole process of tracking it. Um, and I mentioned if you click on the PDF and go to you can even it shows you how to get to the track your ballot. And the post office is very, very secure. Think about how many times you've heard of somebody messing with a mailbox or a mail truck. Is it possible it could happen? Sure. But is it likely? No. And that's just a reminder, if you're going through these sites, that you can click on them and they will take you to the PDF web version, and you can click on other links. And there's other information, not necessarily from election information, but knowing about government agencies and information can help you with problems that you might encounter at some point in your life. Um, it's really quite astonishing how much information there can be about you online, and it can be used for identity theft. I mentioned before, people can find out your voting record. Again, just disclaimer, not how you voted, just if you voted. Um, and it makes you aware of your privacy, legal challenges that you could have, or even if just something as simple of where to live or where to move to. And I put an example here. Um, this is a study, and I'm using it slightly out of context. We're not. It's not a. I'm not going to be talking about if these stats or figures are true. It's just okay. So there's a trend that parents want to find their kids a new school. Um, so maybe you want to find a new school for your child. Think about what would matter to you and where do you go to for accurate information. Now, sure, you could post in schools in Columbus, Georgia, let's say, but a lot of times that would lead you to real estate pages that are, trying to, you know, sell within a neighborhood. How would you know? How would you? And it wouldn't really also give you types of schools. It might give you some of the public school information, but how do you find out more detailed information about curriculum or if there's charter and magnet school programs? So one example is, let's say that you want your children to change schools. There's a few probably ideas or questions that you might want answered, and really only government information is going to give you the best and correct answer in making that decision. Federal and state departments of education. Sometimes different states offer different voucher programs where you can take the tax money allotted for your child for a public school and put it in a private school. Sometimes there's federal money for different educational programs for homeschooling. And then, depending on the state you live in, you're going to want to know what the required curriculum is if you wanted to homeschool your child, and the classroom hours that you need to be able to document and whatnot. And then, of course, demographic and neighborhood data if you're looking to send to a specific public school, or um, if there's opportunities for extracurricular activities near a city that you'd like your child to participate in. And all this information is going to be provided um, through different government agencies, and you need to know how to find these agencies. Let's say you want to buy a home. Um, there's going to be quite a few things that um, you're going to want answered in this huge decision, life-altering decision. Often federal and state have programs for home buyers, or sometimes first time home buyers. Veterans, if you're a veteran or an active duty service member, they often have loan options that are exclusively for military, offering better interest rates, having money down. They can help with. And then again, demographic and neighborhood data. Do you want to live in an urban, suburban, rural area? This also is finding schools. The How do you know if the school district is good? You can look at graduation rates, money spent per pupil. And you can find information that's secondary, based on maybe other people's recommendations, but how do you know what they're recommending is actually in your child's best interest if it's a school issue? Or how do you know that that's really part of the demographic? um, if you're looking for the graduation rate within a specific neighborhood, um, you can't always rely on a secondary source because maybe they're just making it up. So how do you get that direct knowledge? USA.gov is really if you don't know where to go when you know you need government information, whether it's federal or state government, um, not only does USA.gov show you where the federal information is, but it's really helpful in finding how to locate state information and state agencies. And they provide the contact information for state agencies, the website links. So it's really quite helpful. And I think they do a really great job, especially for some of the more complicated issues or topics. They do a really great job in breaking it down and who you have to contact for more information, problems that you might find. And when you're looking for data, and you may not even realize how much you look at data, no one really says, you know what, I need good data today. Often you're needing, for other decisions that you're making, such as buying a home and whatnot, um, you don't even realize that it's data that you need to make a well-informed decision. The census, of course, isn't just for counting population, which of course that's part of what the census does, but they're very good at helping you with business decisions. If you want to open a business, It can tell you a lot of information that it does through its other surveys. They do economic um, indicators studies um, through some of their surveys. That so it's not just the census that we do every 10 years that they focus on. They do a lot of different surveys related to business. They also do a 5-year survey to find more detailed information about communities. So I really recommend that if you ever think of starting a business, especially if it's a brick and mortar entrepreneurial idea, the census can provide so much information so that you're in a location that is appropriate for the industry that you're in. Some places, some businesses are set up to fail just simply because they're not in the right area. Department of Labor, um, they're very helpful if, heaven forbid, you're laid off. They're the ones that you're gonna go to for unemployment insurance. Um, if you're having issues with an employer, sometimes employers aren't always the most honest or treat their workers the way they're supposed to. Department of Labor will tell you in what state what your rights as a worker is. FBI crime statistics. Now, this one may not be necessarily in your daily life, but um, there's a lot of arguing about which city has the worst crime. Well, the FBI crime statistics can tell you, and putting it into a more relatable context. Now, if you're comparing New York City and let's say any other city, because I think New York is either the biggest or the second largest city in the US. If you say and I'm making up these numbers, if it says there's 1,000 murders in New York City and only 100 murders in a rural city. Well, those numbers are kind of skewed because there's over 10 million people in the New York City area. So, and then there's 100 murders in an area that has only, let's say, 10,000 people. So, which is really the more dangerous city? So, it puts it into context of um, crime per capita within so it compares cities in like numbers. They draw it down to which is actually has more crime than another. And not just because, of course, if you just compare the numbers, there's more crime in New York City just because there's more people. Um, Health and Human Services. If the last the pandemic, getting tested was all through Georgia Health and Human Services, which coordinated at the federal level as well. Medicare, Medicaid go through that. If you're on, if you're looking for different doctor programs or what am I? The latest stats for coronavirus information, which hospitals are full. That's all information that may not be always in your daily life, but for a year or so, that was part of our daily lives. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, that's another one that may not be part of your daily life. And I'm using this as an example just because, of course, we're in Georgia. But other states often have a similar government body. Um, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation is kind of like the FBI for Georgia. But this will get into very specific crime rates of within only Georgia. And it can put into context different trending investigations that are going on. If, God forbid, your family has a problem, you call with kidnappings and that sort of thing. The GBI is a place you you'd go to for that kind of information. The CDC. Obviously, with the pandemic, there were a huge source of information drawn from them. But let's take the pandemic out of the equation. What might you need? Well, if you're thinking of vaccinating your child, what's the likelihood that they can catch um, a disease that is commonly vaccinated against? And then going back to our changing schools, does the school require the vaccine even if you don't want to vaccinate your child? These are all, this is all information that is, you would need the government primary source to make decisions for what's right for you and your family. And then federal and state courts um, are obviously, if you're in legal trouble, they can tell you more about the legal systems, and um, but it's not even just legal problems. If you got to file for bankruptcy, that's actually through a federal court, not a state court. If you get a traffic ticket, if you want to get married, you'd go through the probate court here in Georgia. So all of these things that we do in our daily lives, maybe not every day, but at some point, um, that's you're going to need to know where these things are. Um, Also, one other thing I'll add to this is housing. Landlords can be awful people sometimes. Sometimes they're wonderful, though. Um, Knowing where the Georgia code is for landlord and tenant relationships and legal contracts, um, knowing that can help you when your landlord says, you know what, I'm going to evict you, and you need to be out in a week. Well, if you know where to go to the Georgia code, you can say, you know what, that's illegal. You can't do that. And you can't just evict me. You have to go to court to evict me. So going back to trustworthiness, it's easy to want to distrust the government, um, especially when there have been real conspiracies that have um, given people to warn people not to want to trust the government. And are there things the government hides from us? Sure, I'm sure there are. Will there be conspiracies in the future? Of course, there will be. But it's important to remember what we learned about conspiracy theories and actual conspiracies, and to keep in mind that we have to think about the plausibility of a conspiracy and what is the motive. Sure, anything's possible, but it's important to think about how plausible is it. Um, the government is a massive institution with so many people, so you have to think about what it would take to silence people. This is big in the flat Earth um, conspiracy theory, where teachers, government agencies, all these people, NASA, all these people are paid off to teach students in the world that the earth is round when it's actually flat. And it's like, that's millions and millions of people that are being, the amount of money it would take to silence people, the amount of manpower to make sure everyone is staying quiet about this. So if the earth was actually flat, and why, I mean, what would be the point in, why wouldn't they just say, okay, the earth is flat? Um, so there's really no motive to it. And the plausibility of keeping that many people quiet about it is makes it a little difficult to even give it some sort of plausibility, never mind the science. But it's also important to remember there's whistleblower laws and protections. And um, a lot of people say, well, if somebody is going to accuse somebody of something, it's important that the accused know their accuser, and that's actually part of the constitution of your trial. But at the same time, you can't identify if someone fears for their life or retaliation. We won't know corruption if it happens. So there needs to be some form of protection for these people who want to do the right thing and point out when the government's being corrupt and when it's not. Also, look at current events. Um, Through disinformation and misinformation, there are hundreds of people ruined their lives and have felony records now because they believe disinformation about elections. Um, and they stormed the Capitol and broke a number of laws, some fairly minor, up into some people are going to be serving 10 years in prison. So it's important to put, you know, the trustworthiness and belief in conspiracy theories and what could be true into perspective and really think about what you're listening to versus um, the consequences. If you could face jail time, you better be sure that what you're doing, what you're believing is accurate. We've already mentioned the incentive and is it likely, when someone says you can't trust that. And this is why we've been learning that basic fact checking skills. How it would have been easy for somebody to go to the Pennsylvania, was a lot of people said there was election fraud in Pennsylvania. That's just the way they count their ballots. It's part of their state law. So if you went to their state law and saw that, well before the election, that's what they changed their law to, um, it, it, a lot of anger and frustration could have been nipped in the bud right away. So it's also important to understand basically how law works. I'm not a lawyer, as my disclaimer, but it's important to know generally how laws work and where to find your state law information. So, of course, we have local laws. That's city ordinances, city codes. Then we have state and state constitution law, so that goes to the state of Georgia. And then, of course, the U.S. Constitution and federal laws. And they all work together to some point, and they all, local law can't violate state law, and state law can't violate federal law, and federal law cannot violate what our Constitution says. Now, I don't expect you, nor will I ask you to memorize any of the state laws of Georgia, but there may come points in your life where it would be useful to know where it is and what they contain. Um, it's also important, we talked a little bit about civic responsibility earlier in this video, to know what's going on in the Georgia State Assembly. Every state has kind of like a mini US government. We have in the US federal government, we have the House of Representatives and the US Senate. Each state has their own House of Representatives and Senate. So I provided the link. You can click on it to look at it at your leisure. And it provides you with what the state legislature is working on. And I find it important to look at it every so often, not just because I'm a government librarian, but as a citizen, because often we get surprised by laws that they think are passing, and when you see a law that is you feel is wrong, or you can take action, you can organize, you can contact your state representative, not for the federal office. We all have state House of Representatives and state level senators um, that are responsible for our districts. Um, you can contact professional organizations or, uh, grassroots organizations to possibly help in changing a law or um, preventing one from passing. And then I put a link for the Georgia Code. Example I gave before was a landlord is trying to do something illegal. You can call his bluff right away, just knowing where the Georgia Code is. I've had to do this myself, and it's a little hard to read, but um, what is going on? It's a little challenging to read. That's why, you really always should contact a lawyer if um, your problem gets serious enough. But knowing your rights and the laws is important at all, not just at the federal level, but at the state level too. Um, so I put a link so you can, just so you know where it is, what it looks like. And I've created over the years, and I update them quite frequently, research guides. This one is a link to all the links I've created, all the guides I've created. It'll go to my profile on the software that we use for, it's called LibGuides. Um, but I put the specific ones for government information, Georgia's government information, elections. I did a really large study on the 2020 election, so I put a lot of the data I found on a LibGuide, and then a criminal justice guide. And I go into more detail about topics that we discussed in this video. Like I said, government information could be a course into itself. There's just so much information out there available. But I tried to pick out the topics that might be most relevant to you, either now or in the future. So it's important to remember that government information is typically a primary source. Um, Primary sources are the source where you get the information. A lot of times when people are presenting a report, they're giving information that they found on the census or crime statistics. And knowing where a source got their data um, can be helpful in seeing if they're correct in what they're writing, or um, to find more information about their data. And usually, if it says the census, um, I've I haven't heard of too many people trying to manipulate census data to bring one point or the other, but you never know these days. But knowing that these agencies exist for various reasons, and it's not always intuitive, where to go to for certain things. I wanted to make that information known to you. So that's all I have for this. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I will talk to you on the next video. Bye bye.